Now you got to figure out what you have in the way of debt. And this is the part most people don't want to close their eyes and don't pay attention to, but you got to figure out how much you owe in credit card debt, which is most people's highest level of debt. You got to know what credit cards are out there and how much is owed on each credit card. And you got to know, like I said, how much is on your mortgage and your car and all of the various debts that you guys have together, because you're ultimately going to do a spreadsheet and you figure out what all you've got, so you can figure out at the bottom of the line there's going to be a number that this is the equity, which is how much we have. So how much we own, this is what it's worth, this is how much we owe, and this is what there is to divide. And when we come down to that number to know what there is to divide, that's the number that you're talking about. Now, in some states, like I said at the beginning, I can't be your lawyer and I can't tell you exactly what the law is in your state. States treat debt differently. There are some states that say if whoever name is on the credit card, that's their debt. There's other states that say, I don't care whose name's on the credit card, you guys are married and you're both equally responsible for the debt on that credit card. And then there's some states that subscribe to a theory called community property. Not very many states do that, but the ones that have community property, they say everything that you have generated during the course of your marriage and all the debt that you've generated during the course of your marriage is going to be shared 50-50-ish. It's going to be up for division, let's say it that way. There's another part of collecting information about your assets called separate property, and most states recognize separate property, and what that means is if you owned something before you got married, let's say you had a stock account or an IRA, and you had that before you got married, you can carve that out of your marital community and say that is my separate property, and you don't have to necessarily divide that depending on your state and the laws there. But what you do have to do in most states is you have to prove what is your separate property. So you got to prove what you had before your marriage, and if you've been married 20 years or something, that can be really hard to prove. But you've got to start thinking about, well, how can I prove what I had coming into this marriage? If you've only been married 5 or 10 years, it's a little bit easier. But say you had a house, you had a house before you got married, and maybe you're still living in that house. Different states will treat that house differently as to whether that house is part of the marital community or not. But you do need to do the best job you can do to try to find out if you have copies of your closing statements from when you bought that house. You want to get a copy of your IRA from before you got married. So you can say, hey, I had $20,000 already saved up before I married this guy, and I should get my $20,000 back. That's your separate property. Here's where the rub happens and where it gets really complicated and confusing is there's a legal theory called commingling, and what that means is that in most states, if you had a separate asset when you got married, like an IRA, and then you've been married, so let's say you got married in 2000, and you had your IRA, and then you get married in 2000, and then after that, you kept the same IRA and you kept putting money into that IRA, the law could end up determining that you have commingled it, which means that you've put marital money in with separate money, and now that has become a marital asset in some states. So, like I said, I can't tell you exactly how it works in your state or exactly what's going to be in your situation, but for issue spotting, which is what we're doing here, if you had something before you got married, find a record of it so that at least when you take it to your lawyer, they'll be able to give you some sort of advice and tell you exactly how that can all fit together. So while you're going through the financial records, that's stuff that's super important to try to find, because you've got to prove that separate property claim if you can make it in your state and if you have enough evidence to make that proof. Okay, so let's take a minute and you write a list of what you think you have. You probably know about some of your bank accounts. You probably know where you bank. You might know where your retirement accounts are, but I'm going to stop for a minute and you can pause this thing and start making your list of what you've got and where you think it might be, and so that you can start accumulating a list of your assets and do the same thing for credit cards. So on the same list, say we have a Visa, we have a Citibank, we have a Sears card, you know, whatever you have in the way of assets, which are the bank accounts and the stock accounts, and debts, which are the credit cards and the mortgage. So I'm going to stop for just a second and let you work on your list. Okay, the second part of the financial planning for going through a divorce is your income and your budget. So you might be a stay-at-home mom with no income, and you might be a highly paid professional. You might be a human resources professional, make a lot of money. Or you might have a part-time job, or you might have a part-time job that could become a full-time job. Things that come to mind are like if you were a nurse or something where you can say, oh, I want to work some more hours now. It's not that hard to get more hours. Whatever it is that you do, you need to take a look at, you got to get a budget going. So, and we're going to do a session on how to do a budget, of course. So what you want to do is figure out how much money you earn, and then you want to think about how much you could earn if you had to. And then you want to look at, what is your mortgage payment or your rent? What are your utilities, your cable, cell phone? How much do you spend on food? We'll come up with a whole list, how much you have to spend on your kids. Maybe, it seems like every activity that kids do now, there's some sort of a fee for soccer, or, if your kids are horseback riders. And then maybe you're going to get some more education. You want to think about upcoming educational expenses that you have. So what you're doing is you're putting together this list of what is your budget and what is your income, and then you're trying to figure out if you can meet your budget if you are separated. If you have something in your house that's really important to you, might be your grandmother's tea set, it might be pictures of your parents or your grandparents, might be videos of your children, something that you have that's in your house that is really meaningful to you. You might want to get that out of your house and put it at a friend's house, because sometimes you're in a situation where you're in a fight with your ex or soon-to-be ex, and he says, well, I've got your grandmother's coffee cup here, and if you don't let me have my retirement account, I'm gonna crash her tea service. And that's something like the only thing you have from your grandmother. And all of a sudden, a tea service that has really no value in the world, but has a whole lot of value to you, is being used as a bargaining chip for something that's has a lot of value for your future. So if you've got that kind of stuff, as long as it's kind of hard if you've got like this big picture over your fireplace or you have a dining room table, you can't necessarily get that out of the house subtly. But if you've got stuff in your house that you can sort of start getting out of your house before you get to filing for divorce, then that's the kind of stuff that you want to get out so that you don't leave something open that can be negotiated with in the future. So for divorce and separation, there's a period between when you file for divorce and when you actually get your divorce, and that's sort of called the temporary period. And you need to try to figure out, there's two parts of this. How am I going to get by during this period? And then after the divorce, how am I going to be able to support myself? And this is where alimony or spousal maintenance comes in. In some states, they're all different, but in some states, for a temporary period, you can either come to an agreement with your husband or your ex about how you guys are going to pay the bills and pay the mortgage and who's going to live in the house, or you can go to court and the court's going to figure that out for you. But for the planning purposes, you haven't filed yet, but for planning purposes, you want to know, can I afford this mortgage, and can I afford the overhead and the expenses? And if you can't, you want to look at your husband's paycheck, and you want to look at your savings accounts and all the various resources that you have available, and you need to come up with a plan. You can't just, I have people come in my office all the time who says, well, I can't afford this mortgage, so he's going to have to, pay it. But then when I look at his paycheck, I think, well, he doesn't have any extra money either. If you both are making sort of nominal amounts of money, you don't make very much money, you can't expect to get a high amount of spousal maintenance or alimony even on a temporary basis. And those are hard decisions for the court if you end up in court, because they're like, well, here's what your mortgage payment is, and here's your expenses, and he's got to go get an apartment, and here's going to be his expenses. So either you're going to have to do things really differently, or you're going to have to make decisions about, who's going to have access to what amount of money. So this is the kind of the really scary part, but you have to do this in a really sort of harsh, business-like way, and you can't just be sort of pie in the sky and saying, yeah, but he should have to pay. And maybe he should, and maybe he's going to, but maybe he can't, and maybe he's not going to be made to. So you've got to come through your budget. You're going to say, and be sure to put things on there like your credit card payments and upcoming, our furnace is out and we're going to have to replace the furnace, or whatever it is, car payments go on there, insurance goes on there, health insurance goes on there. And then you also want to think about, if your husband is going to move out, if you're going to ask him to move out, how much it can cost to get an apartment in your part of town or in your community, and is he going to have time with the kids? And he can't be like in a studio apartment. He's got to have a place, if you've got kids, where, you know, he's got to have a place where the kids can stay, because I can promise you one thing, the court is going to allow your children to have access to their father. And I mean, 90% of all cases, and if he's a violent person, then maybe not so much. But so you're going to put together your budget and what you think he might be going to have to spend to go forward. And then you got to look at your income and his income and your savings and your other resources, and try to figure out how you're going to be able to get through at least the time period from filing for divorce until you actually get the divorces, when you separate your assets more permanently. So I'm going to stop for a second and let you work on your budget.